Hey, this is Jan for Chess24. In this video we will take a look at a very complicated game, so mentally prepare that this might take a while. But I do think it's worth your time. I think it's a really fun game. It is the encounter between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Alexander Grischuk. They face each other in the semi-finals of the Riga Grand Prix in Riga. This is the second game. The first game ended in a draw. And the way these Grand Prix are structured, that means that should this game end peacefully as well, the players would continue with rapid tie breaks. But should this game find a winner, that winner would move on to the finals. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Alexander Grischuk have faced each other quite a bit. Score is about balanced. I think 12 draws and 1 win for Grischuk in classical chess. And in this encounter, Alexander Grischuk with the white pieces decides to go for at least something risky. I think that's fair to say. Fairly early on. Not the first move. He plays 1 d4. And against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, you can be pretty certain. If you play 1 d4, you will get the Grünfeld. If you play 1 e4, it will be the Knight of Sicilian. If it's d4, you will get Knight of 6, c4, g6. And he is intending to meet Knight to c3 with d5. Grischuk plays a different third move. Not one of the common third moves here, like f3 or g3. But instead Grischuk decides to, go 3h4, push the h-pawn. Which, to my eyes, is still such a weird move, I'll be honest. I sort of understand the point behind it, and then it's an anti-Grünfeld move, but it's still so hard to wrap my head around it. So let me try to explain why this is done in the first place. I believe it's easiest shown if we continue in typical Grünfeld style here. This did not happen in the game. After bishop to g7, knight to c3, if black plays d5, now all of a sudden this pawn makes perfect sense. It advances to h5, threatens h6 or hg, and if knight takes h5, white goes cd5 with an advantage. Now, if this position is good for white, you might ask yourself, why doesn't white start with knight c3, sorry, g6, knight c3, and after d5, go h4? The point is that here black typically won't play bishop to g7. Black has the move c5 that has a good reputation. Well, c6 is also very possible, but they would not go for bishop g7, h5. So in a way, it's too late for h4 once this pawn is on d5. Therefore, Grischuk goes for it here. And yeah, his reasoning is bishop g7, knight c3. Now you can't go d5 because of h5. And if you don't, if you play castles, let's say, then I'll play e4. And of course we can play this sort of strange King's Indian where my pawn is already on h4. But I know you're not a King's Indian player. I know you're a Grünfeld player. So you will not be too happy with any of these structures, even if it means having my pawn on h4. That is the reasoning behind it. And of course, Monsieur MVL understands that reasoning perfectly well. And now has to decide what to do. d5 is probably still not a move you want to play, because there is no knight on c3 to exchange. So after just cd5, knight d5, e4. I quite like white's position. Could also make a case for h5, maybe. c6 is possible, but a bit dull. Maybe not in Maxime's style. Maxime goes for the most enterprising option here. He goes for the move c5. This is not only the most enterprising, it's also the option that's considered to be best, because Anish Giri played this against Veselin Topalov in the only other game I can recall where 3h4 was played at the highest level. And Giri reacted quite quickly with the c5, d5, b5 and got an excellent position. After that we haven't seen much of 3h4 at the highest level. So what's this b5 about? It's a version of the Benko gambit. By the way, happy birthday to Paul Benko, the inventor of this gambit. I think I saw it was his 91st birthday yesterday at the time of recording this. So kudos to him. The original version that Benko popularized is c5, d5, b5 here, which remains a playable opening. It's not as popular at the highest level as it used to be because of some move-by-move issues, but these things, of course, change drastically if you put a white pawn on h4. So the reasoning seems very sound to me, that once the pawn is on h4, you start playing the Benko where the white king really has no way to ever hide on the queen side, because the queen side is about to be blown open. So it has to go to the king side, and there h4 does not really help his long-term security. The drawback of 3b5 is, of course, it does lose a pawn after c takes b5. That was played. a6. Grischuk comes up with or shows his new idea in this position. He does not go for b takes a6, which we had seen in the game I mentioned, Topalov-Giri, where after like bishop g7, knight c3, something along these lines, short castles, black got a pretty good position. But instead, instead Grischuk comes up with a new move, 6e3 here. The point is that white doesn't want to help black developing, bring this bishop out to a6, but he wants to try to build a line of defense on the b5 square. He wants to go knight to c3, pawn to a4. Whenever black captures here, he wants to recapture and then try to keep the bishop on b5. This pawn to a4 also has the plus that it allows his rook to swing over, as we'll see in the game. So it's a typical plan in the Benko without h4. And Grischuk thinks even here it might be worth trying. So he's arguing the Benko is not such a great opening. That's Grischuk's words, not mine. It's not his words either. It's my interpretation of his play. He's saying the Benko is not so great, so I can grab this pawn and still have a good position, even after I commit to h4. And I will also have forced Maxime out of his comfort zone, because this is not a Grunfeld. This is a Benko, a structure he's not as familiar with. Then again, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, the French #1, is of course an absolute world-class player, especially dangerous, calculating with the initiative. And that could very much still happen here. So it's a bold choice by Grischuk. Both sides continue making natural moves. Knight c3, castles, knight f3. Here MVL keeps playing in classical Benko spirit. Pawn to d6. You could also make a case for pawn to e6, trying to open the center quickly, because black has a small lead in development. But MVL sees no need for such drastic measures and goes for pawn to d6. Grischuk plays a4, the plan I was outlining earlier. So this rook can come to a3 if needed, and the b5 bastion remains solid. In this position, Maxime plays a move that's not on the list of computer's top choices, but if you look at the position, it looks highly, highly natural. He plays bishop to g4, which once again pronounces that the pawn on h4 could feel a little silly, some of these positions. Bishop g4 would not get played with a pawn on h2 most likely, where after h3, this bishop immediately has to give his life for the knight on f3. But with the pawn on h4, it can hang out here a bit. It also discourages h5. So a very logical move. Compi prefers e6 once again, trying to open the center. But that's not what Maxime had in mind for this game. Grischuk plays rook to a3. Might look a little strange, but it's always part of the plan. After ab, I don't think he was going to do it, but now you have the option of going ab. This rook is covered. And generally, you no longer have to worry about any tricks against the knight on c3, the rook hanging on a1. So this rook a3 is always a nice stabilizing move from white's perspective. A takes b5, bishop takes b5, as mentioned, ab. Not likely to happen. And MVL goes knight to a6. An alternative, by the way, was instead of a takes b5, to bring this knight to d7 immediately, playing to jump to e5, which looked quite interesting to me. One line I looked at was something like ba, knight to e5, bishop e2, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop back to c8. And black regains one of his pawns, he's currently 2 pawns down, with sort of typical Benko compensation. So knight bd7 might have been an interesting option. Did not happen. AB bishop b5, knight a6, the knight is headed for this very active square on b4. e4 played, knight to b4, bishop to e2, unpinning. Computers like white here, but there are still the long-term concerns about king safety, because this king will have to castle kingside eventually, and then the pawn on h4, not ideal. Maxime plays knight to d7, a move that looks a little funny, because this move in a way legitimizes the white pawn on h4. Now, this pawn could very well be pushed to h5, which would never happen with a knight on f6. It's not easy to suggest a good alternative. Maybe you could start with queen b6 as played in the game later, but the computer is not particularly impressed with it. So knight d7, maybe not so bad after all. It just feels a little strange to let this h-pawn loose. The plan, amongst others, is, after exchanging, to bring the knight here and maybe even end up on d3, who knows. Grischuk castles, MVL now plays queen to b6, connecting the rooks. And Grischuk plays the move rook to e1, which feels a little strange once again, because should black ever manage to put a knight on d3, this rook would be en prise. Also rook e1, it does not keep control of the f2 pawn, which might not be too relevant, but it feels a little promising. There were alternatives. The computer just likes bishop e3, followed by queen to d2, pinning this pawn, and continuing development when, computer says white is better because he likes the extra pawn. In practice, it still feels like it's a big fight ahead, but the setup certainly makes sense. Bishop e3, queen d2. Have a look around. Black cannot do anything too drastic anytime soon. One alternative I should mention, after queen b6, is also the move bishop g5, which always looks very logical in these positions, but here it doesn't accomplish very much because black can just ignore it, play h6, and after bishop e7, rook e8. Bishop would get trapped on e7 once again. We can blame the pawn on h4, not allowing him to retreat. So Grischuk plays rook e1. MVL, not in a hurry, plays queen to b7. Keeping some options open. Maybe also preparing some c4, knight c5 without getting hit by bishop e3. Now Grischuk goes bishop g5. His argument is, now this pawn is hanging, so you have to spend time doing something about it. Since h6, bishop e7. The queen no longer defends the d6 pawn. Therefore, this would not work. Bishop g5, bishop takes f3. That was probably MVL's plan all along. And Grischuk, somewhat surprisingly, goes for a very sharp option here. He goes g takes f3. Bishop takes f3 looks much more natural. What must have bothered him here is knight to e5. Nice multi-purpose move. Defending this pawn. Keeping an eye on the bishop and mainly targeting these two squares. So white will play bishop e2 and now pawn to c4. Once again, black is ready to jump into d3. And this looks scary. The computer of course doesn't care, since white is better. Nothing to worry about, something like rook f1, deep move, sidestepping knight d3 with tempo, knight b3, b3. And he's saying, no problems. But I can very much understand that Grischuk did not like this position much from afar. So Grischuk plays g takes f3, which saves some time since the bishop now controls all these squares, but of course it does weaken the king long term. The king already had the h4 pawn not really looking after him. Now these guys are also not providing great shelter, so it's a very sharp position. MVL goes knight to e5 anyway, still intending to play c4, knight d3, and he sets a little trap because it looks natural to play f4, kick this knight away. But the knight would not move. Instead, black would play f6, trapping this bishop, and this opening of the position would not be good news for white. The black pieces are just way too active here. So f4 is not possible, and Grischuk now also decides this rook on e1, constantly getting attacked after knight d3. Not ideal. Let's put it back. Goes rook back to f1. Maxime had a choice here. He goes for c4, still fighting for this square. f5 was also interesting to give the game a different flavor and try to play on the king side. But Maxime prefers to follow through and operate in the center and on the queen side with pawn to c4. Grischuk correctly tries to undermine this construction ASAP, plays pawn to b3, and MVL brings in reinforcements, rook fc8, giving up the dream of f5. But you can't have everything. He decides to do business on the queen side. Now Grischuk plays a defensive move that is not well liked by the computers out there. He goes bishop d2, just covering the c3 knight, but compensate, that's too passive. And instead they recommend king to g2, sidestepping knight takes f3 with check. And still arguing, what is better? One of the lines is something like this, 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 and black should not take because it's a little slow. But just play bishop e5. When white is still pawn up with the bishop pair, but with this weakened king and the black piece is very active, it feels to me like absolutely anything could happen here. And in practice, I'm not even sure which side I would choose. I kind of like the black position here. So things weren't easy to play for Grischuk, which is also sort of a typical Benko gambit phenomenon. Even if the computer is on white's side, the black moves are often somewhat easier to play on general considerations, or you know the general plan, and you develop some initiative. So there are reasons that many people, me included, have been avoiding even more favorable versions of the Benko gambit because they don't want to give black this active play. And active play it is in the game after bishop d2. MVL takes a very dynamic decision. MVL is a fantastic calculator, and he can do these things because he can back them up by calculating. He goes knight b3, which in a way is the most natural move on earth, but it had to be calculated very, very carefully because it does allow f4, kicking this knight, and it also allows b takes c4, undermining the construction. f4 was played in the game. We'll have a look at it in a second. Let me show you one cute line after b takes c4 that I'm sure both players saw, but worth sharing here. Knight takes c4, hitting the rook, so the rook should move, rook b3. And at first sight it looks like white wins, because the queen is under attack, and the knight is under attack. But black has a petite combinaison. Goes queen b3, knight d2. And once the carnage ends here, it turns out that black has more than enough material for the queen. Currently has a knight and two rooks, even after this knight falls. Black emerges with the superior position. So not happening. Grischuk goes for f4, says, show me the money. Do you want to retreat, sir? Maxime says, no, thank you. I want to mix it. I want to go queen to b4 and attack your rook. There was another even weirder line here, knight b2, also leading to complete chaos. Queen c2, knight e d3. But to send the knight to these squares is very hard for a human to do. So queen b4 is more in the spirit of making normal active moves, backed up by calculation. Now, tough choice for Grischuk. What to do? The rook is hanging. The most natural move, and turns out the best move probably, was knight to b5. This did not happen in the game. And the reason it did not happen is, I guess Grischuk disliked the line c3, fe5, cd2, bishop d3, rook c1, where black is indeed better, thanks to this powerhouse. After bishop e5, with this pawn staying alive. It's not fun for white. The computer is saying instead that this pawn should have been taken, takes f takes e5, and that this position is okay. But it's also understandable Grischuk was not a big fan of this. Here, knight b2 followed by rook b3 is possible. You can even play more dynamically, play knight to f4, go for an attack against his weakened king once again. And yeah, it's already tough to play. It's not all roses here for white. That's why Grischuk decides to retreat, put the knight on b1, not on b5. This looks more passive. The plus this move has is, as we will see in the game, after the forced c3. Now this knight keeps an eye on what's called the d2 square. 1 second, I'll switch a little thing here. Here we are. This knight keeps an eye on the d2 square, so these lines we just saw no longer are that scary. But there are other resources that black has. F, e5, c takes d2 would not be ideal, because now, after cd2, bishop takes d3, with the knight on b1, attacking this pawn. White would be in great shape and actually have the winning position. So what should black do? He is a piece down, after all. The answer is the knight should jump right into the abyss. Go knight to b2 when the complications continue. Queen is under attack, has to move. Queen c2. And now black takes on b2, on d2, sorry. Still sacrificing the knight, but this time, after queen takes b2, the pawn on e4 is under attack. And that makes a big difference. After queen e4, the board is completely on fire. And Maxime must have calculated all of this from far away, evaluating it correctly as playable for him. So let's have a look at what's going on. Black's piece down, but he has so many threats. Rook c2, queen takes e2, bishop takes e5, queen takes h4. The rook on a3 is kind of out of play. So white doesn't really have a choice here. He should get rid of this guy. If white gets too greedy, tries to keep the extra piece. Let's say bishop d1, bishop e5, queen a2, queen h4. This king will not make it very long. Queen takes d2 forced. That does allow rook c2, hitting the queen. Also via x-ray. The bishop on e2. Asking new questions. And in this position, Grischuk has to take a very tough decision. Which, yeah, is made tougher by the fact that there is no great solution. I looked at a couple of moves here. In the game, Grischuk decides sensibly to return the piece and play the endgame after queen d3. But there are some greedier alternatives that, however, seem to backfire. One move that looked very natural is bishop to f3, using some tactics, trying to save this bishop. Rook d2, bishop e4, white would emerge with an extra piece, so black has to continue sacrificing. With queen f3, queen c2. Why is the rook up? Once again, the king. The king is in trouble. Here black could repeat moves, force a draw, but he can continue as well. And it turns out that this position, this is some random computer analysis I did, is pretty much winning for black. He's a piece down currently, but he has 5 pawns on the king side, all coming after the white king. And it does seem like there's no defending white's majesty here. So what else can you do after rook c2? There's a move knight to c3. When after rook d2, knight e4, rook e2, knight g3, the endgame would be roughly equal. That would be a sort of acceptable outcome for black. For white, sorry. For black as well, but for white too. But there is a more brutal solution. Once again, queen h4 coming after the king. Queen c2. Now black is currently a rook and a piece down. But sometimes checkmate matters. And after bishop e5, it's surprisingly hard to parry the threat of queen h2. Checkmate or queen h2, followed by queen h1 checkmate if this rook were to move. The only way to do it is f4, but that runs into this sequence. And it turns out that white is completely defenseless on these dark squares. Black just wins. Too many problems. So there was no other way but bailing out, as Grischuk does with queen to d3. Rook takes e2, queen e4, rook e4, ed, ed, and after all the drama, we have reached an endgame with currently equal material. After this pawn is going to fall, it's going to be equal. And this pawn can't be saved. But I think that black is better here. This bishop should be stronger than the knight. The white king does not have a lot of shelter, so it could very well happen that the black pieces organize and come after him. These pawns are all sort of weak. Therefore, the one trump card that white has are his 2 connected passes. On the queen side, And that will be a big question. Can these pawns advance? Can white organize a defense on the king side while pushing his passes? Or can he not? We shall see. Starts with knight d2. The knight has to get into action. MVL reclaims the pawn, but does it precisely by giving a check first and then taking it with check. King to g2. And Maxime goes after another pawn, goes rook to d4, attacking the knight. And this guy. When I was watching this game, I was expecting the move knight to c4 here, which didn't happen and would have been a mistake, because after rook d5, this knight doesn't accomplish anything. Knight b6, rook g5 check. White does not win material, but he's just misplaced his knight. Another important line, if the pawns try to start running here after b4, they don't run very far, because rook d4 sort of handles them before they can get too dangerous. So knight c4 would be a mistake. Grischuk plays a stronger move. He plays knight to f3. His reasoning being, if you take on d5 now, no, I will go b4. You don't have any rook to d4, and my pawns will run and provide enough counterplay, which seems correct. MVL, of course, understands that, and therefore, after knight f3 says, no thank you. I will not take your pawn this time around, sir. He goes rook g4 check once again. These small things that make super grandmasters. The king is slightly more vulnerable on h3 than on g2. So you force it there, where it does not defend the knight before going to b4. Rook b1, and Maxime plays bishop rook to c8. Very logical, going for the attack, trying to activate here. In computer lingo, this is a mistake. White has a very nice defense after rook c8, and the move to keep an advantage was bishop to c3, stopping this knight from entering the action via d2 or e1, and then slowly improving the position. Black's better. But rook c8, very hard to pass up, organizing in attack and threatening rook c3, coming after the knight. Grischuk starts with king g2, rook to c3. Now the idea that black has is rook g4 check, picking up the hapless horsey on f3. This position is the one where Grischuk goes astray. He had a study-like defense here, but it's also move 37, and he did not have much time left on the clock. As you guys probably know, Grischuk, a bit of a time trouble addict, so he had to take decisions quickly here. And he decided to keep his knight by playing knight to g1. That turns out to be too passive. The very hidden solution was rook to e1. Looks like a logical move, occupying the open file. But you have to see that this loses a piece after rook g4 check. Knight can't be saved. King h3, rook f4. It's just gone. Game over. But it turns out that after rook g4, king f1, the game is actually not over. Rook takes f3. Rook e8 check, very important, forcing his bishop to go passive, bishop f8, so it can never go to d4. And a5. And somehow, at the cost of a piece, white has managed to get the black pieces on such bad squares that here his a-pawn provides enough counterplay. Not for a win, but for a draw. For example, in a line like here, here, here. The game should end peacefully. I think this is more or less impossible to calculate, especially with so little remaining time. Therefore, yeah, Grischuk's desire to keep the knight with knight g1, more than understandable, but it's just too slow. You might be wondering, why do I need this rook e1 business? Why not just push the pawn here? And that also does not work. The key difference here is that this bishop has not been boxed in, so it can come to d4 and decide the game. Here after a6, bishop d4 is fine. a7, rook f2, king e1, g1. Not in time. So let's see what happened in the game. Knight to g1 played. Rook c2. Another nice move. Now going after the f2 pawn. Knight to f3 back. Hard to suggest anything here. If a5, bishop d4. It's just highly unpleasant. Targeting this guy. Knight a3, bishop a7, stopping the pawns. and then black once again starts focusing on the many white weaknesses. Therefore Grischuk returns to f3. And more nice play by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Rook g4 check. Theme we already know. Chasing the king away from his best square. King f1, rook f4, king g2. Now it's move 40. So Maxime, in order to gain thinking time, makes his move 40 quickly, repeats the position once, which is just a professional technique. You repeat the position once, then on move 42, now with extra time on the clock. Now you think, and that's what MVL does. He goes for g5 after a prolonged thing, which is a very strong move. Threatening g4. Can't be taken because of rook g4 check. The white position just falls apart. Grischuk tries rook f1, defending this guy. And MVL does not play g4, which would also have been good, g4, knight e1, rook d2. But instead goes for more tricky play with rook g4 check. Very strong move that I don't think I would have considered. After which the most resilient, I guess, is king to h3. And black can always repeat. Black can also go rook to b4, threatening g4 check. With more trickery, like knight g5 doesn't work because of rook c3, f3, h6. This knight is trapped. I'm not quite sure what Maxime had in mind. Maybe I was wanting king h3, h5, pronouncing that this setup is not very pretty. Everything looked tough for white, but it was still the best hope because the move played in the game, king h1, it allows a direct finish. And it happens. Rook to c3, very strong. Once again going after the knight, and knight h2 would be met with rook h3 or rook h4, eventually picking it up. So the knight can't go there, it can't go here because of rook h3 checkmate. Therefore, tough times. Knight g1 also not helping. Here, bishop e5. There's too many threats. It's one of them. Grischuk tries rook g1. Last resort. Very tricky move. If rook g1, knight g1, all of a sudden white is very much back in business with his a-pawn. But of course, black has no interest to exchange any of his attacking pieces over here. And Maxime continues his little dance with the knight on f3. Goes rook to f4. And it turns out that white is officially overwhelmed. The big reason is this rook on a3 is not contributing anything to the defense, while all of the black pieces are doing stuff. The game continues with knight h2. Knight takes g5 might look more natural, but it doesn't help either. Rook f2, planning rook c2, rook h2 checkmate. Sooner or later, something's gonna give. Knight h2 was Grischuk's choice, but same move. Rook takes f2, rook takes g5, and rook c to c2 is the dagger, after which there's just too many threats. Rook h2, obviously the main idea, saving the knight, doesn't it? Rook h5, doesn't really help either. So the only thing that did help is to resign, and that's what Alexander Grischuk did. Congratulations to Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who I think played a very strong game, full of ideas, full of tactics, full of resources. Grischuk, very honorable, went for such a sharp line in a knockout situation, played 3h4, and both guys came armed and ready to fight in the end. Maxime wins his encounter, and with that win enters the final of the FIDE Grand Prix in Riga 2019. We'll have a look at how the other semi-final went and who meets in the final. If you don't want to know, you are allowed to switch this video off now. So, mild spoiler alert. Here comes the results. Shakhmatyarov defeats Wesley So. He won his first game and was under mild pressure in the second game, but in the end saved the draw and therefore makes it to the finals where he meets Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Both guys did not need the tiebreaker, but won in the classical games. We will see how this final will go between the Azeri and the Frenchman. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you like this game. I'm not sure I did it justice. It's such a complicated game. But I thought it was excellently played, especially by Maxi. Thank you for watching. See you next time.